It's starting. All right, so looks like we are live. All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the O4U webinar, the Tips for Consulting Recruiting webinar. Thanks all for joining us. And I just wanted to say thank you for the speakers that we have. We have two today, and we'll start off with some introductions, and then we'll go straight into what we have so far. So hopefully everybody has enjoyed their break so far and ready to get prepared for those interviews coming up. All right, so as an introduction, I'll start off. I am the O4U's consulting cohort leader. My name is Daisuke, and this is the second webinar that we've done this year. And so I'll give you an agenda later. I currently go to UC Berkeley. I am a senior there, and I've gone to some of the OUBCs in the past. So some of you might have seen me before. But yeah, that's a little bit of an introduction about me. And then I'm going to pass it on to Ned. So do you want to introduce yourself and where you work at? And then Ryan will do you next.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ned Shell. I'm a second-year associate consultant at Bain Company in the New York City office. I graduated from Penn in 2012 with a degree in international relations and consumer psychology. Prior to Bain, I'd spent most of my summers doing international development work, mostly in Latin America, centered around kind of microfinance, education, financial inclusion, and switched gears a bit to come into management consulting.
And I guess that means I'm up. I'm Ryan Van Dyke. I'm a first-year business analyst in McKinsey's Toronto office. I graduated from the University of Virginia. Everyone at this point is probably wondering why Toronto. I'm a dual citizen of Canada and the U.S. is sort of the quick answer. Prior to joining McKinsey, I interned at a number of other firms, but I primarily did U.S. government work, and my focus has been on cybersecurity. So I also took a little bit of a detour towards management consulting.
All right, so thanks Ned and Ryan for talking about a little bit of your intro. Today what we have so far for you guys is a little bit of different things that you can look to prepare yourself for the consulting internship recruiting coming up in January and February. So we're going to be talking about resume and cover letters, networking, and then introduce you guys to the case interview style and how that all works. And in terms of questions that you may have, feel free to post them at the Google event page. I'll just be taking some of them and asking the professionals here about some of their tips and things like that. So we'll be taking questions after each of the three sections that we have so far. And so we'll go straight into the resume and cover letter. But actually, before that, I did wanted to talk a little bit about what you can expect for being O4U in the consulting cohort. And so we do these types of programmings throughout the year. The number varies, but it's usually related to helping you guys out in terms of the recruiting, and it's outside the conferences that we have, like OUBC, OUTC. And you can also connect with other members from the consulting cohort, as well as some of the professionals here. And so I think it's a great value, and we want to try to offer that value. So we're always also looking for feedback as well. So that's what you can expect for O4U. And now I think we're going to go into the resume and cover letter section. And so Ned's going to be talking a little bit about some of the tips that we have to get your guys' resume and cover letters prepared for the recruiting session. So Ned, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Daisuke. So preparing a resume, there are three main things that, and this is actually true, three main things that Bain looks for in a resume, and I assume it's probably the same with most of the other consulting firms. We bucket them under leadership and extracurricular experience, academic performance, and also work experience. And so what I'd like to do is just kind of delve into each one and tell you how you can best present yourself. And so when people are kind of going through those buckets in their head, they can check each box for your resume. And Ryan, feel free to jump in if I say something you totally agree with or disagree with. But in terms of leadership and extracurriculars, and some of this might be more obvious than other points, but I've seen a lot of resumes that emphasize quantity over quality, and I can tell you without a single doubt, if you run one club or you're vice president of one club, that is much better than being in 50 clubs. I've seen resumes where they just have like a list of 10 organizations that they're in, and maybe they are, the secretary of a couple of them, or, something a little unsubstantive, but nothing serious in any of them. That does not check the leadership extracurricular box. It definitely leaves it blank. So I would say try to focus your efforts on explaining one club even if you weren't president of it, you had a major impact in, maybe 2, maximum 3 clubs, and go into detail about them instead of listing, oh, I was a tutor for this project once a week, and I, was on the club team and showed up to 2 games, et cetera, et cetera. So really focus on a couple things. It also lets the person reviewing your resume not get overwhelmed by the number of things you've listed, but really say, okay, this person had these 3 things. He or she really cared about them, and that's what's important to this person. So quality over quantity is the first point. The second point is if you're coming from a target school, which means the office you're applying for has kind of a pipeline of applicants from that school, the people reviewing your resume will most likely be alumni from the school. And so what you see sometimes is students, giving 8 lines to a club that the alumni know is kind of a unimportant club, or at least not unimportant, but not a very rigorous club, and they can identify that immediately. So I would say keep in mind the people who are reviewing your resume. If there's someone familiar with your school and the company, they'll be looking at it and they can vouch for the legitimacy of the things you put on it that someone outside of your school might not really understand. In terms of academic performance, a few points on this. So one, I've seen people stress out that, oh my gosh, I have a 3.75 and Billy has a 4.0, and that person is going to be much more likely to get an interview. That is not the case. We do not. If a 3.8 is basically the same as a 4.0, you basically checked like you're a really, 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 really strong student. Just because you got a few more A's than A minuses, that doesn't matter. I would say on the flip side, if you're below a 3.5, then you want to maybe you took a very rigorous course load and you want to highlight that, or something. I would say that's an area you might want to compensate a little for. You can always list relevant coursework. So I was an international relations major, nothing relevant to business, I guess. So I listed the relevant course. True. I don't think even business majors are related to what you do in management consulting. But either way, I listed relevant coursework. So I took some courses in the business school in the marketing, legal studies departments, and I took some statistics and basic calculus. I didn't, of course, call them basic calculus and basic statistics on the relevant coursework, but I listed those things so that the companies I was applying to kind of had in their mind, oh, this person has demonstrated an interest in the types of thinking and skills that are relevant to this job. So that's a great way to kind of make up for any gap you might see in your academic performance. Another one that's extremely important and is on everyone's mind when they're reviewing resumes is, can this person do math? And that doesn't mean can they, chug out integrals and derivatives and Maclaurin series. It just means, can this person, if they're in a room with a team and they're shown a bar graph, can they kind of say, oh, that's about 30% of the market? Really just mental math. So the way you can prove that is, like I just said, show relevant coursework. But if you have a good SAT math score, and I'd say that's anything above, anything in the low to high 700s, I would list it. I'd absolutely list it. If someone's a classics major with work experience in research departments and other classic university majors, whatever, if they have a high SAT math score, we think that, at least in our minds, that means they are good enough to at least test out in the case interview to see if they can do math. So I would say try to prove you can do math. If you can't do it with your SAT score, if you can't do it with your coursework, make your resume formatted in a way that just sounds kind of mathy. So I would say, oh, in this club I increased participation by 30%. Like they want to see you think in numbers. What else on that point? Yeah, I think that covers academic performance. And then in terms of work experience, if I had to say one of these 3 things between leadership, extracurriculars, academic excellence, and work experience, if one had to matter the least, it would actually be work experience. Other people might disagree, but when we're looking at resumes of undergraduates, we don't expect all of them to have done corporate work before. doing well in school and doing well in your extracurriculars is very indicative of being able to do well in an actual job. So I think a lot of people freak out about, oh, I need, you know, an amazing internship my freshman summer, or my sophomore summer, or even my junior summer. I have a fellow consultant in the New York office who spent his junior summer before applying to Bain writing a crossword textbook. He did so well, he actually got to publish some of them in the New York Times. Absolutely nothing relevant to business, but still extremely impressive, shows he's smart, and then he did end up getting a job. I wouldn't say you should spend your summer writing crosswords, but that's just an example of, you know, someone who took a different path. I would say that you do want to show you've done something with your summers, though. So, you know, a brand name isn't a bad idea if you have something at a company everyone recognizes, Goldman Sachs or something. It's definitely a positive. But I would say you can also do something that is really, really cool. So we see people who, you know, helped manage an orphanage in Nigeria. Even though they weren't doing operations at an investment bank or a Fortune 500 company, that's still really cool. It shows they're passionate. It shows they work really hard. And that's, in my mind, that's just as good as doing investment banking the summer before they apply. When you think about your resume overall, I would say this is how you get an interview, not how you get a job. Once you're in the interview, they'll look at your resume and they'll think about it a little bit, but 90% of the reason you would get passed on to final rounds and get a job offer is how you perform in the interview, not what your resume is saying. So think about your resume as a foot in the door and not your way in. And then one more point on the work experience, I would just say that what you do, this is probably an overused point, but what you do during your internship or during your position, during the school year, whatever, is much more important than the company you work for. So if you can say you had an amazing impact on your employer's company or organization or nonprofit, that's if you can explain that in your resume, that's just as good as, you know, having a big brand name. So as an example, I spent my freshman summer at a think tank, my sophomore summer in Bolivia and Argentina at nonprofits, and then junior summer at a microfinance bank. So nothing business related, but still kind of showed an interest in a specific area that I was able to articulate its relevance to consulting in the interview. Moving on to just some specific resume tips, kind of tactical tips. So like I've been saying, you want to show a balance between soft and hard skills. It's hard to show you have soft skills in a resume. That's more what you do in the interview. So as much as you can, you want to show that you have hard skills. That's SAT, math score, how you describe your activities, etc. And then when you talk about in your bullet points about each of the extracurriculars you've been in or your work experience, two things. You want to show the impact you had, not your duties. So if your duties as president of the newspaper was to run the newspaper, publish it 5 times a week, and remain financially sustainable, that's not interesting to me as someone who's reading it. I want to see, oh, did you increase readership? Did you increase the number of issues in circulation? Did you increase the revenue or sponsorship package sizes? What did you do, and how did that impact the organization? And then quantify it. That's another big thing. It's often hard to quantify your impact, but if you can, even if it's kind of an estimate, try to quantify it. It shows you think in numbers, and it's really easy for the person reviewing your resume to just say, oh, wow, that seems like a very tangible impact. Remember that people reviewing your resume probably are only looking at it for, oh my gosh, I guess that depends, but 20 seconds to a minute, depending on the situation. It's not that long, and so they're looking for the major highlights and then kind of very pithy, to the point facts about what you've done. They don't want to read big words that don't really fit in the bullet points, like don't use leverage if it doesn't mean leverage in that situation. Don't use
just don't use leverage.
Don't use leverage. That's a very overused term in our industry. Yeah, so you see people throwing around like, oh, distribution channels and supply chain and blah blah blah, and that's fine if that is actually what is relevant to what your position was, but don't put it, otherwise you'll seem kind of lame. And then one other point that Daisuke had mentioned to me earlier, but I think is really relevant, is when you're talking about a certain activity, I would say open with a general, if it's not obvious what it is, if it's Goldman Sachs, you don't need to tell me what Goldman Sachs is, but if it's a nonprofit, first bullet point should be like, I was this position at this company or this organization whose mission is this, like serving poor children in Nigeria or whatever it is, and then go into the impact. I would say you really don't want to list activities if you can't put more than 1 or 2 bullet points. Like I said before, you really want to focus on quality over quantity. And then in terms of cover letter, so the jury is out about how important cover letters are. Some people read them, some people don't. If you're on the fence, they might often read them. I actually often read them just to see if there are any errors, like they spelled someone's name wrong, or they or they put the wrong company, or they anything like that just shows the applicant wasn't diligent about their application. They definitely get the boots or whatever. But otherwise, it's more likely to hurt you than help you. But if it does help you, the way you want to structure it is open up with a very brief paragraph saying who you are, where you go to school, what your major is, why you're interested in 1 or 2 sentences in the job at the company you're applying to, and then maybe a kind of something enticing that's like, I'm really interested in management consulting because my experience in international development has taught me the skill set in consulting is extremely transferable to that industry, and I think I have a lot to bring to the table and I could learn a lot too, or something like that. And then you want to go from the most compelling part of your story to the least compelling part. So if your compelling story is, wow, I took all these really hard classes, I did really well, they involved a lot of group projects and teamwork. Here's an anecdote about how I led a team from what we thought was going to be an F to an A+, and here are some classes that I took that I thought were really relevant. Then do that. If you had some work experience that you thought was really relevant, like, I was in a really difficult situation this summer, and the team wasn't getting along. I really pulled things together, and then we had XYZ results. Start with that, and then go to your academics, whatever order you really think is necessary, but then just end with another succinct reaffirmation of why you want to join this firm, and your contact information, even though they have it from when you applied on their website. And to any extent you can list people you talk to at the firm for more than a minute, then list them. And to any extent you can detail something specific about the firm, even if it's just once, especially at the very beginning, like, oh, I talked to Bob about the really cool nonprofit projects that these consultants do on the side. That's something that really interests me and really perked my interest in the firm, and now I'm really excited to apply. So I'd say those are the specifics on cover letter. Again, resume much more important to getting you an interview than cover letter, but cover letter is certainly important too. And I think that kind of wraps up my points about those things. Anything to add, guys?
Nope, I'd agree with most of it.
Cool.
Ryan, anything to add?
So for most of that, I definitely agree. In terms of whether or not cover letters matter and things like that, I think it actually varies depending on your school even. So for example, at UVA, McKinsey doesn't even take cover letters. Probably because the number of students applying out of that school is absurd and they would never have time to read all of them. I definitely agree with, make sure that you're showing that you can be quantitative and things like that. For McKinsey, I wouldn't necessarily list academic classes and things like that, only because unlike the other firms, you'll take a quantitative test. So we're going to know well before you even get to the first rounds how good you are at math. But other than that, I'd say definitely if you're not having that quantitative test, you need to show that you are quantitative, even if your major may not be.
And Ryan, maybe they did it differently at Penn, but is the quantitative test after you get a first round interview or before?
It's at the same time, so I would say after. So you'll only take the quant test if you have gotten the interview.
Okay.
But I guess the way to sort of think about this then is we just won't consider math as much when we're reviewing your resume as others will, on the assumption that we'll get to test that.
And just for everybody's information, the quantitative test that Ryan's talking about is the McKinsey's PST, and I believe that's, what does that stand for again, Ryan?
Problem solving test.
Problem solving
Yes.
test? Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Yes. And that could be. I know the McKinsey website also has some sample PSC tests that you can take to prepare for those. So feel free to go to the website and just get more information about that.
Yep.
And so, just time-wise and everything, I think that that's good enough for the resume and cover letters. And I'm just looking over here for any questions. For those that are listening in live, please feel free to put your questions on the Google event page, or you can just message me on Google Chats. Either way works. So as a main cover letter, and we're going to go next to the networking portion. And so, Ryan, if you're
Yep. I think you're breaking up a little bit on my end.
Yeah, me too. You want to just take it away, Ryan, and hopefully he.
Yeah. Regardless, I'll roll with it. Yeah. So I'll take a little while and just talk about this term everyone loves to throw around, networking. And I will start by saying Ned definitely got the more important of the two things here, at least from my perspective, when it comes to getting the interview. For me and from my perspective, networking is important, but it's something that comes along sort of as a long tail consideration. So you can either do really, really well at this, or you can be really, really bad, or it just doesn't matter. And so I can explain that with a couple antecedents and sort of case examples that I have from people. If you generally just come off as arrogant or not likable, you can ruin your case no matter how great your resume is. They will make a note of who you are, and that will be that. So rule number one, don't do that. If you are highly likable and you can get people engaged in who you are and you know what you have to offer, you can get fast tracked to a sort of at least first round consideration. For the majority of people, it's more an opportunity, I think, for you to actually gain information and get tips and tricks on what to do in the first round interviews. At least that's more along the lines of what I think I use the networking events for. And so some key points here is, you know, try and make an impression in the best of way. And the way you're going to do that is not going in with sort of a list of questions necessarily or with some sort of overall target. Go in and just really try to get to know these people. I mean, most of the people you're going to be meeting were in your spot just a year earlier. And so if you can approach them at sort of a personal level and show, in some ways, respect while also showing that you can be an equal, I think that's the best way to approach it. Part of, you know, the strength that I find in management consulting things is the fact that it's a lot less hierarchical, I feel like, than a lot of other industries. So the idea is you should be able to present yourself and you should be able to speak intelligently and engage with the people in the room as if you already had the job. As far as gathering information and things like that, I would say you do not make this your main priority. I don't like discussing things that are very commonly and easily found on a website.
Yes.
So do not come up and ask me questions that you can just as easily get from the career website for two reasons. One, I probably already got asked that 5 other times. And secondly, it will come off as you having not done your homework and your prep for it. And that just shows sort of a lack of interest in the firm generally. That does not mean you can't ask about, you know, what kind of work I've done and things like that. That's all fair game, and we'll share what we can. And then you can use that to sort of try and find those connection points, those similar interests, and expand on them. So again, as far as how to prepare, rule number one is just do your research, do the due diligence, understand generally what management consulting is, what we do. And to the extent that you can try and tease out little bits about what makes each firm unique, you can do that as well. But that is also something that I think is very important in the networking part for you personally. Maybe not as far as getting the interview and things like that, but I think it will help you sort of distinguish where you want to be and what the little differences are in the firm. Feel free to reach out to contacts, family members, friends, alumni, anything like that. Again, for your research purposes or anything else, also realize that people you know will probably, you can ask some of these more general questions that you could also find on the career website, and they won't judge you as harshly. So feel free to do that. As far as other things, coffee chats tend to be more personal in nature. If it's a large network of people and you have multiple sort of little groups forming around people, one, go to the consultant or analyst with the least number of people. They're more likely to remember you. Second, try not to be that guy. And what I mean by that guy is the one who has to feel like they're dominating the conversation and always has to interject, and realize that cutting someone else off or being sort of that guy who always has to one-up everyone else does not come off well. And there will typically be one every time I've done one of these sessions. And again, it shows sort of some of those softer skills that Ned was talking about. You can't get across in your resume, you can get them across in networking. And a lot of it is, you know, at the end of the day, can you put this guy in front of a client? Is he going to work well in a team? Does he sort of exude confidence without being arrogant? And all these things are going to be sort of questions we're asking ourselves. As far as timelines and things like that, we can briefly touch on those. For those of you looking for an internship, go ahead and start now. I'm not sure when your guys' applications will actually be due. It'll vary by school, so just go and check your websites. But you should have already, hopefully, been to a couple of these networking events and met some people. If not, start reaching out now. For full-time, you can, again, continue to sort of build these connections and keep track of them. So, for example, I did my initial interviews with McKinsey for an internship. I did not get the internship. When I came back for my full-time interviews, I still had the contacts from my internship interviews. I still kept all the information. I was able to reach out to them, continue to sort of get that feedback on what I could do better the second time around, and sort of continue to sort of build those relationships. And so by the time it came to see would I get that interview for the first rounds, would I advance, I already had sort of, you know, the cheering party behind me that wanted me to do well and was making sure that, you know, I got the first interview and things like that. So two lessons there is, one, keep in contact, and two, don't be discouraged if you don't get the internship or the job the first time. I think most of us do not. As far as other things, I don't know, Ned, is there anything you would add to any of that?
Yeah, I agree. Definitely didn't get the internship. I would say one thing, now that recruiting is in full swing, I've been reminded of this fact is, and even at UBC a little bit, but some people think that more airtime equals more likelihood of interview. So, you know, that could mean, you know, the more people I talk to, the more chance of interview I get. That can actually be a bad thing if I'm like, oh, who have you talked to recently? And it turns out we've all talked to the same person and they asked us the same boring questions. That could actually be a bad thing. If you keep me on the phone for like 45 minutes, well, we'd have to end it before then. But keeping someone on the phone for longer is not a good thing. In fact, making it short is probably better because people are busy and they want to get back to their job. So being mindful of that. There are a lot of people who think the longer the conversation is, either in person or on the phone, the better it is. That's definitely not true. Usually, as the person talking to a professional, you can tell if there's kind of a connection within the first 5 to 6 minutes, and if there's not, you're probably not going to get an interview from the conversation, and you should just move on. And then I think just the attitude about networking is often, if I go to this event and come out of it without having made this lasting, amazing impression on someone, I failed. And that makes people be really aggressive. That's the wrong attitude. The right attitude would be like, oh, I'm going to go to this event. Maybe I'll learn a few things, and maybe I'll meet someone who, I connect with a lot and helps me down the line. But being a lot more relaxed about it. I mean, like Ryan said, this is not the most important thing about your application is your application, and this is kind of that's very peripheral to that. So that's my 2 cents.
Great, Ned. Thanks, Ryan. And I think one thing that I wanted to add here is also when you're doing the networking, of course, being genuine, and in terms of the questions that you want to ask, it's also ask the questions that really would help you out in terms of building your story. So you'd want to continue to ask yourself why the company, why consulting, and why you, basically. And so as you're going through the networking, make sure that you ask those types of questions. Some companies, like Bain and McKinsey, have those cool different types of programs that you might be interested in, and you might find that in a particular conversation. So when you find those things, sort of ask the questions to get the information so that you can then bring it to the interview and say, okay, this is what I know about the company, kind of thing. So that's something that I wanted to say and touch upon. And I think that's good for the networking session. Thanks so much for both Ryan and Ned. And now at this point, I want to move on to the case interview section. And this is just an introduction to what a case interview is like. Again, like what they said, at the end of the day, it's really you have to nail the case interviews. The resume and the networking get the foot in the door, but at the end of the day, you have to be very professional at these case interviews. For this webinar itself, we're not going to go too much into the details, but we're going to give you the overview and give you some suggestions, tips, and how to start practicing. So I'm just going to go straight into what a case interview is. It's basically strategy consulting firm's way of assessing candidates' problem-solving abilities and structure thinking abilities. And so in terms of the actual structure, what will happen is an interviewer will come in and ask you some behavioral questions and then present you with a case. And we'll go over what a case looks like in a few minutes. But the point is for you to sort of lead the interview and solve it in the most structured way possible. And there's different types of these types of cases. So some could be about market entry. So a company is thinking of entering a new market. What do you want to do with that? Another could be starting a new business. And growth strategies, profitabilities, those are all different types that are sort of up there. And those are different types of problems that, as a consultant, you would be looking into when you're actually doing the work. So some of you have probably taken a look at what a case interview looks like, and with that, some of you have probably started to take a look at the frameworks that you use. Frameworks is something you're going to hear a lot during the case interview practice sessions. The thing about frameworks is you use them to try to solve the case itself, but you don't want to do it. You don't want to overuse them so that it becomes sort of robotic. You always want to be very natural when you're using these frameworks. And there's a few popular frameworks out there. Some of you might have heard of Victor Chang, and he has the profitability and business situation frameworks. What you can do is go to Google and look up those frameworks. They're pretty useful to solving different types of cases, and the profitability works for some types of cases, the business situation works for the others. Again, though, there's a bunch of other frameworks that you can use, and we'll tell you about the different types of sources that you can find for those. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of what the profitability and business situation is, and then we'll go into an example slide talking a little bit more about the case itself. So profitability is basically the profitability is profits equals revenue minus costs. It's founded on that. It's really useful for isolating the mathematical cause of drop in a profit. So sometimes a case will say that XYZ company, the profits have gone down, figure out why. And you would use a profitability framework as sort of an overview to figure out where in the profit equation is lies the main problem. Is it the revenue side or is it the cost side? So it's mainly good to use the framework for when there's a sort of a to mathematically deconstruct the problem into component parts and to answer the question where is the real problem. But when you're really asking the question why the profits have gone down, it's better to use something like a business situation framework. And that's really what Victor Chang does is looks at the company, the customers, the competition, and the products. And so that's the framework itself. You can take a look at it on Google and find out more information about that. But that's just an overall introduction to the different types of frameworks. I think what's going to be useful here is to take a look at an example of what a case is, and we can sort of give you a start of how candidates would solve this. And I'm going to have Ned and Ryan also help me out here in terms of constructing a potential framework that you can use. And so before we do that, though, I do want to say that in terms of the benchmarks that people do to practice, there's a wide range, but Victor Chang, who's sort of an industry guru out there, says that 100 hours of practice is sort of the benchmark there, and the candidates who received offers at top 3 firms, 90% invested around 50 to 100 hours. That being said, just because you do put in 100 hours of practice, that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get the final offer. It's a lot about quality over quantity, like we've emphasized in the previous section of this video. So just keep that in mind. But with that said, I do want to introduce this example slide here. And Ned and Ryan, are you guys ready to sort of also kind of come up with a framework for this while I'm trying to do this screen share?
Sure.
Yeah, I think between the two of us, we can.
But
we
I'll
can
read the
this.
case first. So
It is so quick, you forget how to do a case interview.
Okay, so I'm gonna just do a screen share, and let's see. Okay, can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is a case that might
Although
be
it's kind of
given
hard
to
to
you in an interview. I'll read it out. So,
Okay.
fast food company is selling specialty food snacks and desserts. Today, it has over 50 locations across the U.S. and is continuing its expansion. While sales have increased in all stores in the country, some locations have experienced decreasing profits. How would you help the company identify what the problem is? And so once you get this type of case, whenever you get this, one of the first things that you want to do is think about what are the major points in this case, and you can say it out loud. So you can start off by saying, okay, the company is Fast Food Co. and they're selling specialty food, snacks, and desserts. Here's the problem, and this is the objective, what we need to do. And then here's also the time when you want to ask your clarifying questions. So if you have any sort of brief general questions that you want to ask the interviewer in the beginning, you ask them during this time, and then after that, after all of that, you want to take some time to think about what are the different types of things that you want to take a look at, and this is where your frameworks really come in. So for example, when I was thinking about this case, the 3 buckets or the 3 areas that I would have looked at would be the market itself in terms of what is the market for specialty food, snacks, and desserts, the customers, the competitors, all under the market, and then thinking about the second bucket, which would be the profits or the financials of the company, what's going on with that, and then maybe the third bucket could be something like the company's operations, asking questions about how it expanded and how that contributed to the decline in profits. So that's one way to set it up. I'm sure there's other ways. Ned and Ryan, do you guys want to put some input into what you think might be helpful here?
Sure. So when I think about this problem, I would I think your framework was great. I would probably break it into five pieces, kind of start high level and get down specifically to the problem. The first thing I would do, though, is, like you said, clarify the objective. And in my mind, you should be thinking this is a profitability case. So I'd say, first let's start the industry. What are the competitors in this fast food market? What are the trends? It's been doing well recently, blah, blah, blah. Then I'd say, okay, how about the company? Is the company owned by a holding company? What is its org like? Is it public? Blah, blah, blah. I wouldn't spend much time on these because they're never the problem. Then I get into the products. So we're selling fast food. Is it a specific chain of or type of fast food, Mexican, McDonald's-esque? What are we selling? Fourth bucket would be customers. So who are we selling it to? Are we kind of going towards the high-end part of the fast food market, the low-end part of the fast food market, geography, demographics, and then I'd get into the real one I'd want to explore, which is portfolio. So, we have all these locations. We've been expanding. What is the profit across the group of 50? What's the profit by store? Since I've been kind of like drive this, and I know in Bain interviews this is important. I'm sure it doesn't hurt in other interviews, but be hypothesis driven, which means you kind of guess what the problem is. Even if you're wrong, that's fine, but you at least are showing some kind of proactive thought about it. So I'd say, okay, well, it says sales have been increasing in all the stores, so I assume there's something going on with cost. So I'd like to see, what the cost structure has been in each store, where it's been increasing, and then, I'd love to think about if there's any patterns among the stores, what you're doing well, what you're not doing well. Maybe if we've been expanding, the stores that we've been adding haven't been doing well, or maybe since we've been expanding, the stores that are the oldest haven't been doing well. And I'd ask the interviewer questions about more data on those fronts.
Great, Ned. Thanks for that. That's very comprehensive. Ryan, do you want to add anything to what Ned said?
No, I agree with Ned, especially on his point on being hypothesis driven and really driving the interview yourself and not so much relying on the interviewer. And so to that end, I definitely agree. A good candidate here will say, we'll get to the point that this is a profitability question. So either, revenues are going up or costs are going down. A better interviewer will say, I think that based on what we have here, sales increasing, it's a cost problem. So let's start there. And I think the best interviewers are the ones who even take it one step further than that and say, we see here that sales have increased in all stores, so I think it's a cost issue. And based on what I know about fast food companies, costs maybe have been going up because of X, Y, and Z. Let's explore those. And so the more sort of hypotheses and the further you can drive it forward, I think the better.
Great, thanks, Ryan. Question here. So what were some best practices for you guys when you were practicing for case interviews? And we can start off with Ned.
Sure. So personally, I didn't actually like Victor Cheng's website, but most people do, so whatever, pick your poison. But I think for me, especially not having studied business, it was great to start out with case in point. They have 12 frameworks in there that really kind of capture, they're very exhaustive in terms of the types of scenarios they capture. So just becoming familiar with all those different types of scenario is good, but then the next step forward, which is I think kind of what Victor Cheng does, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I basically, when I started being successful in case interviews, I basically had one framework that I almost used for every single case. And it was like 4 buckets. It was industry, company, product, customer, actually kind of like the one I just used. Product, customer, and then sometimes there was a 5th bucket like risks or opportunities and risks or something kind of fluffy that just sounded good that I didn't go into too much. So I'd say becoming comfortable with just like one framework that you can really adapt to different situations was very important. In terms of just tactical practice, I think unsuccessful applicants allocate their preparation time to 60% case interview, 30% behavioral, and 10% kind of research about the firms. I would say you want 90% case interview and 10% everything else. People don't do enough live case preparation, and they think spending a slight majority of their time on case prep is good or sufficient. But when you're being judged in an interview on whether you'll get the job or not, it's based off of how well you do on the case. And if you're a pleasant person, and honestly, you don't need behavioral questions to determine whether you like the person being interviewed. You can tell from the interaction in the case itself whether they'd be someone enjoyable to work around and someone kind of with a head on their shoulders. So I would say that's how you would want to allocate time. Oh, and then at least for me, practicing mental math a lot was very important. I know most Bain interviews I had, they wanted numbers pretty quickly without writing things down. They weren't long division problems, but they, an example would be, oh, okay, our target market is $90 million. We can capture about 6% of that. What is that? And then you would have to kind of do in your head, like, okay, 4.5 plus 0.9, and give them the answer pretty quickly. So practicing mental math was another big thing, at least for me.
Great, Ned. Thanks so much. How about Ryan? What do you think were some of the things that you did to help you get prepared?
Yeah, so there's definitely no alternative to just practicing. Do as many as you can with as many different people as you can, because people give them in different delivery styles. You'll have some people who will take more control. You'll have some people who will sit back and literally just watch you struggle. So really just getting comfortable with different people's sort of approach to giving the case, I think, is important, as well as just exposing yourself to as many different scenarios as is possible. Aside from that, though, it really, for me, I found you have to kind of know what your own strengths are in order to prepare. So, for example, Ned said he had to struggle, or he struggled a little bit with the mental math, so we focused there. I was an engineer undergrad. Mental math was never a problem for me. I spit it out very quickly. However, I was not a business person at all, and I was not smart like Ned and took business classes outside. So for me, the most important thing was picking up the frameworks and really sort of understanding what are the right questions you should be asking of these. And that was sort of round one, internship interviews, what I did not do. And so I went back and I got feedback from my interviewers, and it turned out that I had learned the frameworks very well, to the point of Ned's point of being robotic. And so the next push sort of beyond learning the frameworks is to throw them away. Don't get, realize that as, we've talked about here, there's case in point, there's Victor Cheng. Guess what? Every consultant you interview with is going to know these things, and they're going to know if you are reciting word for word from the book. Probably because the 3 candidates before you did it as well. So one thing that I think can help is always having sort of what I think Ned referred to as sort of his fifth bucket that was sort of fluffy and sounded nice and wasn't necessarily, it shows creativity, it shows sort of thinking outside the box, and it, at the end of the day, when they come together to talk about how candidates did, it can help them to click and say, oh, that was the guy who talked about X versus, oh, he did well. Because I'm sure this is equal across all firms, but the way sort of McKinsey puts it is in order to get past the first round, you have to be distinct in every category, but you have to spike somewhere. And so what that means is, you have to be good at the mental math, you have to be good at the case, you have to be good at the behavioral, and then you have to be really, really good at one of them. And so if you're not good at the mental math, then you get creative somewhere. If you're not good at sort of the frameworks, then you better ace the quantitative part. And so I think, as is my sort of advice in general for life, know yourself, know your strengths and your weaknesses when you go in, and play them up. And one thing I will say, just specifically in terms of McKinsey, because it was not like this for any of the other firms I interned with or interviewed with, you cannot only allocate 10% of the behavioral for McKinsey, because McKinsey interviews are that your first round will be 50 minutes, and 25 of that will be behavioral, and 25 will be the case. And so McKinsey actually weighs them in even our guidelines, in our scoring guidelines, 50% each. So I think, again, this is very specific to McKinsey. So if you're not interviewing with them, don't listen to this at all. Then definitely go 90% to the case. But realize that if you do go into a McKinsey interview, that behavioral portion, they will ask you one question and one question only. And you probably should have prepared because you will be talking about that experience for 30 minutes.
Yeah, and with those types of interviews, they also drill down very much, right, McKinsey? They ask you, so what happened, and then
Yes.
what happened, what did this person say, and things like that, right, Ryan?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
they will. To the point that there are a couple interviewers who are tougher than others, you could say, and literally will try and get you off your game from time to time. I did not personally experience this, but I know others have, to where it's, well, where were you sitting and what was that person wearing and what exactly did you say? And so, yes, they will drill down and check every detail of your story.
Great. Okay, so thanks for those comments. One thing that I did want to add is, again, with the emphasis of quality over quantity. So, you know, while you're allocating your time, make sure that you are really honing down on what your mistakes are each case after case. So it's really not just a checkpoint. I guess you just did 50 cases, but it's really a checkpoint of, okay, after each case, you analyze what you did wrong, and then you bring those mistakes and what you learned to the next case going forward. One thing that one of my friends did that was helpful was to create an Excel sheet of just different types of things that went wrong in a case, and then so just you're tracking yourself throughout the whole entire process. And that could be one thing that might work for you as you start your preparation for cases during the winter break. So. And would you guys say that winter break is a good time to start for them in terms of the internships?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Definitely. Depends how naturally good at you are, but for people like me who are not naturally good at cases, it's definitely want to start by then.
Okay, yes. All right. So great. So now I just wanted to come up with a little bit of some suggested resources that we have for you guys, and it's just a little list of things that you can look out for as you start your process. One thing is Victor Chang, and that's not the only resource out there, but he does have the 12 video YouTube series. He talks about different types of frameworks and how you can sort of familiarize yourself with the whole process, and that's important when you're starting afresh, just to know how everything works out and stuff. So you might want to just take a look at some of those videos and feel your preferences for what you like. Victor Chang also has the Look Over My Shoulders program, which is not free, but he has audio recordings of simulations that he's done with the candidates, and he also has a voiceover telling you what's good and what can be improved on. He also has the subscription email through caseinterview.com. That's his website, and he sends out some tips through email, and some of them are pretty good. So you can take a look at those. There's also another website called managementconsulted.com, and they have a bunch of tips for recruiting, like resume, cover letter, but also company profiles as well. So those are pretty useful. In terms of books, there's Case in Point that was mentioned. Also, there's another book called How to Get into Top Consulting Firms. You can just Google those and take a look at those books as well. And those are the different types of resources. Lastly, the O4U consulting cohort does have a resource for the juniors that are going to be recruiting for the internships. And also, if you're a sophomore and you're also recruiting, that's totally fine too. But this is the pure case interview sort of system that we have, and what you do is I'll send out an email later. Basically, you'll say you're interested, and then I match you with another candidate from O4U, and you guys can start practicing. We created this this year, and this is the second time that we're doing it, and we've got some pretty good feedback on it. And you get to connect with other people that are also trying to go through the consulting process. I think the whole recruiting process itself is really a teamwork-oriented kind of style. You have to, work with a partner to learn things and help each other out as you go through the process, and that's one thing to keep in note. So just keep that in mind, and I'll send a follow-up email regarding that after this video is done. So that's that with the suggested resources. And I'm done on my end. Does Ned and Ryan, do you guys have anything else to add as overall before I wrap the video up?
So I'll add just to your last point on its sort of team effort and things like that. Uh, I can honestly say probably the best case practice I got was not doing the case myself, but giving it to other people.
I agree.
So you'll find that you are able to, one, get different approaches and different ideas if you are working with other people and giving them the case. And secondly, in order to be a good case giver, you have to know what you're looking for. And so it will really cause you to step back and look and say, you know, here are the things that I'm going to be evaluated on, because you're actually evaluating someone else on that. So as often as you're practicing a case, I would be giving them as well.
And my last point would be that I think a huge portion of your success in a huge factor in your success in a case is how confident you are in the case. If you're talking with ease, a little bit conversational, but mostly professional, not using a lot of ums and so's, making sure to look the interviewer in the eyes, that is super, super, super important, because half of consulting is talking to clients and presenting in front of clients, and they kind of proxy for how good you are at that skill with how you act in the case interview. So I'd say focus a lot on the kind of the soft part of the interview and the delivery, and also realize that at least I was petrified that I was going to get a case that I'd be unable to solve because of a lack of math knowledge or industry knowledge, and just realize that would literally never happen. You'll always be equipped to solve it. So if it's not coming to the top of mind, you just have to think about it a different way, but it's there.
Okay, great. Yeah, and if you want to start practicing, there are also case materials out there. A lot of the MBA programs have different types of cases that they release. The consulting clubs release different types of cases. So like the example that I gave you, there's multiple ones in a case packet. I think some of the good ones are like Wharton's, Michigan's, and they're out there on Google, so you can also look for them there. Also, if you have friends in these MBA programs, that's always a great plus to connect with them and get those resources as well. So that's that. Ned and Ryan, thank you so much for your comments and for your insights into this. Appreciate it. And I'm sure that the viewers here might see you at some other O4U event. Really, O4U is here to help you guys out in terms of your recruiting process. I'm here as a resource to help and guide you as well. And so if you have any other questions, please feel free to email me. Don't hesitate to do that. We hope that you stay involved and also contribute back. Let us know how the whole process works. It's sort of like a cycle that we're trying to create here. So with that said, thanks all for attending, and happy holidays, and we'll catch you later. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Thank you.